All right, so as we just heard, recording in progress once more. We might still have some people coming in. We're excited for anybody that wants to join at any time. If you'd like to keep yourself off camera since we're being recorded, we certainly understand that. And we will be asking a couple different questions off and on throughout the session in different forms, either in the chat or in some polls that'll pop up on your screen. So other than that, chances are probably best to stay muted for a while, but I think that's all the basics. Let's go ahead and get started. So we are here tonight for Introduction to Equitable Arts Education. Why does it matter and what does the law say? You're here tonight with me, Miranda Hein, Executive Director for Arts Ed Washington, and James Andrews, National Arts Education Association Secondary Teacher of the Year for this 2024, and numerous other awards under his belt prior. He was also one of the main people that helped bring this law that we're talking about, bring it into existence back in 2021 and 2022. So he'll be here to kind of help us understand some of the details there. Say hello, James.
Buddy, forgot I muted myself.
It's all right. It's going to happen more than once, I'm sure. All right. I guess I should also say, for me, before I took this role at Arts Ed Washington, I would consider myself a career educator. I've worked in K-12, primarily secondary, and also in, sorry, just admitted another person from the waiting room, so I got distracted, and also in university as a supervisor of student teachers when they go out into their teaching internships. I've done a lot of work in performing arts, especially certified music ed, dance instruction, done a lot of work in theater, musical theater, also teaching English language arts for like 15 years. So this content is near and dear to my heart, and I am really excited to be able to share this with you. Thank you to all, gosh, we're up to like 25 of us that are here tonight. So thank you for all being here, and let's get going on the information. We do have some important details that we wanted to cover with you before we get into the material at hand. Oh, more people still coming in. This is exciting. Next time I'm going to have to add a person to admit other people from the waiting room. We do want to cover some community guidelines before we get going, because we are super glad that everyone's here. We already said, some of you have entered since then, you're welcome to stay off camera or on as fits your needs. Please note our session is being recorded, and the slide deck that we're showing tonight will also be available on our website within about 24 hours. So you can go and download this from our website if you would like the detailed reference. Number two, tonight's session particularly is open to people from all backgrounds and all regions of Washington. We'll dive into subsequent details a little bit more with more audience-specific content later, doing some work with teachers, doing some work with students, doing some work with administrators, and you're still welcome to attend any of those sessions, but some of those deep dive details won't be covered tonight because this is more of an open session for covering the basics. Number three, your responses will be invited through several survey questions tonight. Your insights are greatly appreciated, but never required. We're just glad you're here. And number four, we also recognize the topic of public education is complex, and sometimes it's even polarizing. So we want to ask that everyone who attends sessions with Arts Ed Washington helps us maintain a welcoming and respectful and thoughtful environment for everyone involved. If you have questions or concerns, there will certainly be ways to share those, but we always want to share that challenging discourse with respect and sincerity. Then just a nice little disclaimer, although the presentations address some state laws and regulations, they're really just intended, I'm going to slide this to the other side, they're really just intended for general information. These should never be construed as actual legal advice. The allowability and effectiveness of any action or activity in particular schools or districts or regions, it will depend on the underlying facts and circumstances from wherever you are. And if you have more specific guidance, we recommend that arts education advocates discuss the information with your local policymakers and accountability partners, and we will be giving you some links for those things later on. Okay, I think that's good. Oop, I skipped too far. Okay. So one last piece that is, of course, really important for us to recognize, Arts Ed Washington serves the entire state of Washington. And we want to acknowledge that we are living and working and learning on the traditional homelands of many Indigenous peoples. We recognize that there are complex histories and cultures of Native peoples who have stewarded these lands since time immemorial. And this acknowledgement is not meant to take the place of authentic relationships with Indigenous communities, but we want to offer it as a first step in honoring the land that we occupy and the Indigenous people who still inhabit these regions today. And so just as an additional offering, we'd like to share some links for you when you download this later. Here's a link to the Tribes of Washington and to OSPI's Office of Native Education, because I think being able to access some of those resources will be really important as well. Okay, all that, now to the main focus. Why does arts education matter? And for this one, I'm going to pass it off to our good Sir James, because you've already heard me talk a lot. James, take it away.
Well, it does depend on who's asking, and that's why we're going to have different webinars that kind of focus on different audiences, because if we're talking now to the general public, we can kind of look at all of these things, right? We just came through a worldwide pandemic, and where did everybody go when we couldn't go anywhere? We delved deeper into the arts. So this is how we communicate. We read books, we watched movies, we learned to cook, we took up painting and did some online courses in drawing, painting, and sculpture. We did everything that was arts, so we could reach out and connect with humanity when we couldn't physically connect with humanity. So I think that's the most basic reason to say, why arts matters. When you're talking to somebody who's maybe more in charge of purse strings and outcome-based kinds of things, well, then you can start looking at, artworks, and then what that means for students that are going to go out into the world, whether they're choosing to go to a college or whether they're choosing to just enter the world of work. Arts is going to give them a leg up. There's numerous data that show that students that are engaged in the arts outperform their arts poor peers in basically every single category that you can come up with, and including things that you would never normally associate. I mean, things like they're more likely to participate in a science fair, they're more likely to register to vote, they're more likely to go to a four-year college and finish their four-year college on time. So these are all like more tangible things that sometimes it can be said to be correlative, but it's hard when you get so much correlative data to not say there's not some causation in there. Of course, when we talk about that, we have to remember that saying that things like arts raise test scores is a slippery slope or a double-edged sword there, because we don't want to make the arts the only reason that we keep the arts is to raise test scores, because the don't raise the test scores go down a year. You can have naysayers and say, well, see, I told you. That's not. So
might as well get rid of them now. Yeah.
So yeah, it really does depend on who's asking, but the arts, I think it's impossible, especially over the last 5 years, to not realize what an important part of all of our lives this is, and how such a huge part of our population, this is how they experience the world. This is their number one form of communication, through the arts. Some people are medical, some people are arts people. It's just a way of the world. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's such a really important point, James. When we get down to the foundation of arts advocacy, it's that. It's the humanity and the society, and it's all the pieces put together that matter. It is, of course, as probably folks who are here tonight know, it can be really challenging to try and advocate for change around arts and around arts education, because it does depend on who's asking as to which slice of that information you share. And so, if we're talking to a state senator versus talking to a school district superintendent versus talking to a building principal versus talking to a student's parent or guardian about why the arts matter, our answers might be slightly different in any of those four cases, right? And James just gave a lot of really great examples that you might be able to give for any of them. But then if you find yourself not having the right information for that particular person that might most persuade that person, we want to make sure that we're also giving you plenty of other things to pull from to share with that person that might matter more to them. So like on this slide, we also have some facts that we actually got from a fantastic national resource that we'll have linked for you at the end of the slide, saying the Washington arts and culture sector carries over $72 billion to our state's economy. So if you're talking with someone who really thinks that jobs and economy matters a lot, and it does, don't get me wrong, it definitely does. But if that's their primary motivator and they don't want things like the arts to detract from healthy economy or a viable career choice as they see it, then a statistic like this might actually be a really good one for you to pull. And I did say we'll have that link, but the Americans for Arts Fund is where you'll find more of that. I also realized I got so excited to dive in and hear James's answer that I did not share with you your first chance to share with me a little bit about you and who are you. So we're saying it depends on who's asking, but we want to double check that we know who's here tonight. So let me go ahead and launch this poll for you. And you should see a poll up on your screen. If you're in a place where it's not convenient for you to answer, then don't worry about it. And I did try adding more options for other, but they didn't save. So you have three choices for tonight: arts student, arts instructor, or ... other.
One of the more important things that I think is that fits most for where we are right now, as far as why arts is important, is the equity piece. The fact that over the last few years, the idea of equity has become really centered in our culture, and the data that's come out that shows that arts education all but erases the achievement gap for students of color, low SES students, shows that, and then on the other hand, shows that those students are the ones who are the first ones to have their arts education denied to them for lack of funding or for pushing, other standardized testing in other areas. So to make that an equitable society where everybody has the chance to achieve at an equal level, I think is one of the strongest parts of why the arts are important to us right now.
Absolutely. Yep. And we'll come back into all those details in a sec too. I'm sorry, I'm kind of interrupting us with my little poll here. It does say about 76% of us are arts instructors tonight. Oh my goodness. And y'all still probably have homework and lesson planning to do. Thank you so much for making time for this. We have about 24% of us that are other. Again, I do have a better updated poll for that later, but it just did not save for me for tonight. So thank you for contributing to that. I want to launch one more before we get too much farther. In terms of where you are, I think this is another really important one for you to consider, and therefore also answer for us in a poll if you would. Demographically, Washington State is really, really diverse. We have quite a big spread of backgrounds and political leanings and religions and geography that impacts whether you're more of an urban or more of a countryside, rural, farm, agriculture. And all of those things really play into the way that we operate in our own smaller societies and the ecosystems within our larger state. And so being able to think about that impact when you're talking with the people around you, and then when you're listening to the stories and the reasons of people from elsewhere in the state, I think that's also a really important thing for us to remember, is that our geography does matter. And especially here in Washington, we have such a big variety. So yeah, let's take a look. All right, I think we have most people that have answered. Oh, one more came in. Okay. Let me see. Oh, it's going to show me the details. I don't know if it's going to show them to you. Skagit County, Pierce County, Snohomish, Pierce, King, lots of King. In Washington, we're not surprised. We appreciate you all, King County people. But I am also really excited to see Whatcom County, Chelan County, Whitman County, Clark County, Thurston, Yakima, Kitsap. All right. Yeah, I'm not going to go through all the zip codes. That'll take forever. But I do have them now, so thank you very much. And I have another person entering the waiting room. All right. Okay. We'll move on from the polls. So let's make sure I got them in. Yes, I did. Yeah, note to self, next time appoint someone else to let people in from the waiting room, because I'm Becky, are you volunteering? Oh, bless your heart. Thank you. Let me see if I can make you a co-host. Okay, I'm going to try to do that. You know, I got to say, if it weren't for being a teacher during the pandemic time when it all changed to online, this would have really overwhelmed me. But thanks to the growth that we all experienced during that time, I can at least kind of sort of navigate this. So back to the actual presentation. Again, along the lines of why the arts in education matters. James was talking about this just a moment ago. We see all of these really important, statistically verifiable facts regarding the academic impact of students who take arts and how it impacts the rest of their academic experience. Statistically higher GPAs, higher standardized test scores, higher college going rates, lower dropout rates, academic benefits across all kinds of other socioeconomic strata. But even then, the Department of Education for the entire country has consistently acknowledged that there is lower access to arts education for students of color than for their white peers. And so if you look at the breakdown from different schools and you compare the schools who have a statistically higher percentage of students who self-report as white, those schools more often are offering more arts classes. And that means there are going to be more students of color in the schools where less arts is offered, and those students are not as likely to access the arts, and there's going to continue to be more and more of a gap between how many of those students have these arts influences and those that don't. Another aspect that's really important for us to consider in Washington is that rural communities and regions with lower socioeconomic status, regardless of the percentage of students who are white or students of color, rural and lower socioeconomic status also struggle to fund, to hire for, and maintain equitable arts programs. So I don't know that we see as much data yet about those two subsets, rural and low socioeconomic, but I dare say we're going to see probably similar trends, that since those schools don't typically have as much ongoing equitable arts access, they probably are not going to have as many of the arts influenced positive benefits for the students who probably need it most.
You know, another thing to note there too is that even if a school or district has arts programs, their students of color and low socioeconomic students within there are less likely to access those because
Yep.
they're more to be pulled from their arts courses for remediation
Yeah,
in test subjects like
absolutely. You are so right. And I mentioned at the beginning, those of you that might have come in late, we're still so glad you're here, and this is being recorded, so you're welcome to go back and watch that beginning if you find it useful. But one of the subjects that I've spent many years teaching is English language arts. And I've been the teacher who had a student that came in to say my sophomore English class at the same time that they were having to retake their 9th grade English class because they failed it. And I know that struggle for that student and for me, that they already maybe felt like a failure. Now they're having to face twice a day the class that made them feel like a failure without the skills that they needed to get to the second level, but they have to take it anyway while trying to make up the skills for the first level. And it most often pulls them out of whatever academic or elective they wanted to take, whether it was specifically performing arts, visual arts, an extra PE class, whatever it was. But then they also miss out on that. And I really don't have the answer. There is no easy answer to that problem because those students do still need to recoup those skills and those academic credits. But I just know that struggle firsthand. And it's really, really hard. So anything that we can do to create more access for these kids is a win in my book. 2 more statistics that might matter depending on who you're talking to. Research from the American for the Arts Fund, again, says a survey from them says 91% of Americans have gone on record as saying that arts are part of a well-rounded K-12 education. If you want to have a well-rounded education, make sure you have the arts in there. Also, back to what James said at the very beginning, 73% of their survey respondents said the arts also give them pure pleasure to experience and participate in. And I love these two statistics side by side because it's really the big picture. It's what they are for us as individuals, as a society, and in our academic world. In terms of data for arts in schools in Washington, I have a little note at the bottom of the screen here. First thing that I will mention is we in Washington, through OSPI, are able to offer credit in dance, media arts, music, which is everything from general music to theory to choral music, guitar, band, instrumental, theater, which could also include not only acting and performing, but stagecraft and audio tech and a variety of things there. And visual arts, which is what you might traditionally think of as drawing, painting, charcoal, mixed media, pottery, gosh, so many things. And then there's things like graphic design, which might be a little visual, might be a little media arts. So there's a really, really wide range of opportunities for the arts in Washington. But of course, whether those are being taught is a matter of who lives in that region that has the skill and the certification for those classes, what can the school afford to hire, what can the school afford to staff, what are the students interested in taking so that the classes continue to get offered. And in order to find out that type of data, there's actually a group in Washington State, including Arts Ed Washington, the Washington Arts Commission or ArtsWA, Inspire Washington, and OSPI, and several other organizations that have joined in the last several years that initiated a statewide survey to find out what our data shows us about where the arts are being offered, how many of them are being offered, how many of them are being taken, and any demographic breakdowns that we can find. The data is still being processed. It'll be a while before it's publicly available, but this type of data takes a long time and actually quite a lot of money to collect and then to analyze and produce and share and properly teach about. So prior to this project of data collection, it had been, I want to say 14 years since Washington actually collected comprehensive data of arts in our schools. We have some regions that have collected their own data, and I will harken back to King County. Thank you very much. They've done a great job of collecting that data, and we can kind of try to extrapolate it, but you know, the education data in King County is going to look really, really different than in Moses Lake or than in Cheney or than in Twisp. And so it helps, but keep your eyes open for when this data comes out in the future, because I think we'll start to get a lot of really good insights at that point. All right, so now we know about the importance of the arts and what the arts are, I guess, counted as in Washington State schools. So now let's talk a little bit about what our Washington State law requires of arts education, and specifically what they consider to be equitable in arts education. So this is going to be a little bit bookish, if you will. So I will start it and James will take over because some of this is his area of expertise. First thing, high school graduation. Students in Washington need 24 credits to graduate, and technically they need 2 in the arts, although one of them could be waived if they have another dedicated pathway that they're choosing and they can swap out that second arts elective. I want to make sure I note too, though, high school is not the only time kids should be getting the arts, right? So the high school graduation requirement of 2 arts credits has been in play for a while, but we're going to start really wanting to focus on what students are getting in elementary and middle school as well. So the foundation of this, there are 2 laws in Washington State that describe what counts as basic education. They're called RCWs, or Revised Code of Washington. We'll get into details on those in a second. Then we'll talk about the ESSB, basically the Senate Bill 5878, which provided a new legal clarification of what counts as equitable for these arts programs. And then there's SBE, or State Board of Education reporting. So the Washington State Board of Education is the organization that is responsible to collect reports from all school districts each year, and the school districts report to them what they've been teaching in science and in math and in arts and in all the other many state requirements that they have to fulfill. So State Board of Education, we'll talk about that in a moment as well. Okay. James, do you want to do this part, or do you want to jump in at the next one?
Sure. Well, the Revised Code of Washington, this has been add-ins from 5878, so has been now incorporated into the RCW 28A. So before, believe it or not, in that second part there where it talks about all common schools shall give instruction, the actual words visual performing arts weren't included in there. All this other stuff, all the way down to like health and
English grammar.
hygiene were on there, but the arts weren't on there. So that was the first thing that I put into that bill, was to add visual and performing arts into there. And it's really important, and becomes really important later on when we see that it is the words visual and performing arts. All common schools shall give instruction in visual and performing arts. So in the top part there of the RCW, that was there before, and that's where, and I forget, and Renee would probably be better at picking this out, but what actual bill or section of the law delineated that arts, defined the arts as, at the time, dance, music, theater, and visual arts. And it was just a few years back that we added media arts into that as well. Might have been, was it 2195 that did that definition? I'm not sure. So we've got a definition of what the arts are, and now we've broken it down that all schools will have visual and performing arts, so that we know that our visual arts are all of our, drawing, painting, sculpture, things like that. And then our performing arts are theater and instrumental and choral music and dance and all of that. So those things all have to be done. Whereas before we were out of compliance because we were saying we had to have the arts, meaning dance, music, theater, and visual arts. And so we were barely getting one, if any. Now we've made it easier for districts to comply by saying you have to have, at least one visual and at least one performing art at your school at all times.
And before we get into any more of the details with the SB 5878, which is on the next slide, I should also go ahead and launch our next poll, which is supposed to include just a quick self-rating. And I might have already tainted my ability to pre-assess here because I've already started giving you some information. First question is, I would like to know, rate your current understanding of what Washington State requires for arts education, just based on what you already know. Do you already know what's required? Do you kind of know? Do you really not know much of anything about what's required for arts education? And then rate your current understanding of education funding policies in Washington too. And then we'll obviously dive into both of these answers in just a moment.
I can't answer, but I'm like a 5 and a 4. By the way, you get my data as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And yeah, this is already really interesting to me because I'll show you a little bit. Prior to tonight, we collected some answers from educators across the state, and some of you might have responded to that survey as well. So it's just interesting to see the difference in these two answers. From what we can see thus far, we have a much stronger understanding as a group here today of what is required for arts education. Almost all of us are a 3, 4, or 5. And then much more distribution of answers with our understanding of funding policies. And actually quite a lot of us are 1s and 2s. So I think it'll be really interesting to see. Hopefully we can clarify some of those things for you tonight. I'm gonna move that off the screen so you don't have to watch it. Okay. So then into the details. So again, James was one of the folks that really helped to launch this bill and to get it passed through both houses of Washington legislature so that it actually became then incorporated into Washington State Code or Washington State law. So we've placed on the screen for you a few key details. James, you want to walk us through those?
Sure. So like in the RCW, it says every student must have access to arts education as part of basic education. And again, the important thing to remember is that the title of this Senate bill
yes.
It was a clarification of arts education law. So it wasn't new stuff as much as, wringing of hands and gnashing of teeth as there was about it. This was really meant to be a clarification. So getting rid of the mushy, muddy language that allowed districts to kind of, get around what they were supposed to be doing for their kids. And that's not to say that anybody's like doing that on purpose. It's just, you have X amount of money and 8 bajillion different things for it to go to. So sometimes you do need that kind of clarifying guidance from the legislature to say, no, thou shalt put it here first, kind of add that bit of a hierarchy to it. So arts instruction must be accessible by all students in a manner that is commensurate with instruction in other core subject areas. So this is probably one of the biggest points of the law. I chose that word commensurate on purpose, mostly because most people don't know what it means. The only time they see it is in a job posting, and it's, you know, the phrase salary commensurate with experience. So I think it's, oh, well, it's kind of like ish, that kind of thing, but commensurate actually means equal to. So if you, what the intent and literal meaning of that section of the law is, if you have math meet 5 times a week for 30 minutes a day, then your arts classes shall meet 5 times a week, 30 minutes a day. Period. There's no iffy language with that. There's no wiggle room on that. That's just what it is. That's what commensurate means. There's no alternate definition to commensurate. So if anybody kind of like drifts around that, you can don't concede that point. Know the language.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the one thing for you all to be aware of as you possibly go to have these conversations with your administrators is absolutely commensurate. It means it needs to be equal to. The question that you might end up really diving into is how many hours are being offered in your other subject areas, and is your given art or art form commensurate with at least one of those? Because I know in my region, so I'm coming to you tonight from Spokane, we have had different arrangements over the years in some of our nearby school districts. One district in particular had, science offered by a specialist maybe once a week. And then if art was offered once a week by a music specialist or a visual arts specialist, then that would be commensurate with science being another of the basic education requirements. It would look very different if you were making it, like James's example, making it commensurate with math. But it also is highly unlikely that you're going to have the exact same number of hours for math as for reading, as for writing, as for science, as for social studies, as for PE, as for music, So you really are going to need to look to truly understand how is your particular school scheduled and what are you trying to become commensurate with, because it still isn't super easy. Like we said at the beginning, this is still a pretty complex conversation. But what should not be happening is you should not be having, say, science, social studies, math, reading and writing at some point every single week, and then drawing once a month, a special music unit right before a holiday concert, the kids perform and they're done with art until May, so it needs to be happening during the regular school year. It needs to be happening during the regular school day. If you're at a school that has like a 0 hour or a 7th hour, and that is part of a regular scheduled offering, my understanding is that does in fact count, because it's part of the regular schedule. It's part of your FTE as an instructor. But that would be different than if it was just every Friday, the kids get to have a dance party. That wouldn't count as your performing arts, right? It's great. I'm glad you're still doing that for your kids. We don't want to take away from that necessarily, but that wouldn't be commensurate with the regular instruction that students are receiving in their other subject areas. I hope that helps to kind of clarify too. All right.
And I make those discussions about what commensurate means and what the other core subject areas, how often they're offered. I would make those discussions as public as possible. So, talk to your administration through the school board, ask for for the district to say, all right, what does commensurate mean? What's our usual offering for the other core subjects?
I put this
on record and get it in front of, and make parents hear it, and hear those responses, so that they're going to be able to smell that when it's nonsense. It's like, well, it's kind of equal because we have it once a month, and they're going to say, no, that's not what commensurate means.
It needs to be a regular part of your schedule.
I put a question in the chat, but I've ran into this in multiple districts. Currently, my husband's is doing it a lot. They never have subs. It's a high needs dual language elementary school, so it's not a substitute's favorite place to go. Yep. They pull the specialists all the time on paper. Yeah. And because he's PE, he doesn't get pulled because the state pays attention to that, but they don't for the
Yep.
other. So even though
Yeah.
there's no accountability, I guess, at the state level for us. So, and then the principal, the school board, everybody just shrugs at you and is like, well, we have to have a sub in the room. And right. So we can all probably list 1,000 examples of that, but
yeah.
In my
Yeah,
research,
you know, oh,
issue,
go ahead, Jane.
that's a union issue. So if you have certain disciplines teachers that are getting pulled for extra duty or anything like that, or getting pulled from their responsibilities more than other subject areas, that's something we brought up with the union, and the local should.
I know, at least, and I happen to used to work at this building. I know it's been brought to the union, and the union's brought it to others, and it always hits a dead end of there's nowhere to give, and if we meet all the state guidelines, we don't have enough hours, those sort of comments, which they put in a lot of laws, but they don't give the time or resources, is what, whether that's the easy out and partial truths or full is, a different discussion, right? I was
sure. And no, and that's a good point too, that we'll try to hold on to that as one of those questions to try and dive into when we get to talk with more administrators and more educators too. So Kim, when we get to our next poll in just a little bit here, if you're able to copy and paste that would help us make sure we hold on to that question so we can come back to it later. And before we move on from it right now, I also really want to point out, James just brought up a really good point. What counts as a union issue in one school might be slightly different than a union issue in a different school based on what your school has contracted, right? Your CBA is going to dictate what is allowed and what isn't allowed in your particular school or in your particular district. And so, this part of the complexity here too, folks, I'm sorry, I'm providing probably as many concessions as I am answers here, but part of it is we also just have to become really, really informed, because we are not only trying to do our best job as teachers, but as teachers of art and as teachers who want to be treated as professional. And that means we need to know about arts regulations, and we need to know about budgeting, and we need to know about arts requirements, and we need to know about arts techniques, and we need to know about differentiation techniques, and we need to know about special ed techniques for our students with a variety of different needs, and we need to know about, right, like all of these other things. And we need to know about our own contracts and our own union expectations so that we can navigate that. So definitely there's a lot for us to know. I would just say this is also one of the times when I think I would really say, get connected with your Washington Arts associations, whether it's music association, visual art association, theater, thespians, dance educator association, like get connected with them, because we can accomplish a lot of these things together and learn from each other in bits and pieces, instead of you having to feel like now you have to go and spend 10 hours reading your union contract and 10 hours reading the law and 10 hours learning about budgeting. Like, let's parse this out, right? Let's have one of our groups take this, Arts Ed Washington will take that, maybe Inspire Washington does this. And so there are different pieces we can learn from different players in this field. Okay, James, back to you.
On the flip side of that, you can also rely on the larger groups to help speak with you, because it's really easy for me as an art teacher in my district to walk into a board meeting and talk and be ignored, or to walk into my superintendent and be ignored. And even thought of like, well, he's just trying to feather his own bed, or he's trying to, protect his own job,
right,
or anything like that. So getting it out there where it's, you can't ignore it, because there's organizations all over the state, and the PTA and everyone else is coming in there and saying, no, this needs to happen. There really is strength, and that's why we need to. I've always been an arts with an S person, so we need to all work together on this.
Yep, love it. Thank you. 2 more points on here on this particular slide.
Oh, okay. So I kind of scrolled up there without me knowing. arts instruction must be accessible to all students in a manner that's commensurate. And then arts instructors in each school district as subject matter experts shall be consulted in related decisions to their school. So this is really important to me, and this is another one that I feel like we kind of slipped in on there and didn't get any attention. I was like, so, but it will look very different in your school, in your district, depending on how involved you get. So the important thing here is to be the one that frames the conversation, right? So this can take the form of, if your principal sends you an email once that says, hey, we'd like your input on the course catalog, and they can turn around and say like, oh, so we're in compliance with that section of the law. We consulted the people in there, but you should be looking at, especially because we're looking at increasing those elementary arts programs that are so lacking. It's our responsibility as secondary arts educators to get together and look at for the district and what we believe should be their K through 12, what should be available to students, and not leave it up to principals and administrators in those elementary schools who have no idea what we do and how it gets done and what students really need. They think one art is having one form of art is as good as having any of the form of art. That visual art and music, same, right? They're all arts. So it's really important that we work to form a formal committee, have formal recommendations for our district, and make sure they get presented at a school board meeting so that they're on the record. That was the of that, to make sure that they can't just kind of shove under the rug or ignore.
Yeah, it's a great idea. I would add to this too. I think this is one time where the school budget might actually kind of work in our favor. Please, I hope I didn't just jinx this for all of us, but you are the subject matter expert. If you are faced with the decision between having to narrow down and do this arts course or this arts course, and in the case of a visual art course, you're looking at not only the materials it takes on a regular basis to actually run the class, but are there any big significant pieces of equipment that are needed, right? Do you actually have a kiln in your school? If you do, then great. If not, then somebody saying, oh, well, certain resources are cheaper than these resources, so you might want to do a pottery class. That the upfront investment might be way too much. Why would we do that? But if you are maybe in a school that already has like wood shop or auto tech, they might have an arrangement where you could, in fact, kind of, do a partnering something or other. You might be able to utilize some of those really big pieces of equipment. And maybe it wouldn't be such a financial burden on your school, but you're the only one that knows that for your school and for your art form. And same thing in like a theater or a music class, the administrators have a lot that they have to know about their school. It's, I think, not feasible for them to also know every last little possibility that we might want to spend money on in our particular field. And so if we can really do that research for them and say, hey, if we were to offer this class, we might actually be able to, run it with a few more kids, help balance out some FTE for you, keep your numbers low in a different class, do it with the such and such materials that we already have, utilize this community resource just across the street. Like you might be able to include some budgetary benefits that nobody else would know but you. So consulting you as a subject expert, I think, is really a wise tool for administrators, not just because I care about the arts, but that could also then work in your favor. It's just that you then would have to really do your own homework to make sure that you're coming to that table with that monetary idea to contribute. And one last thing on this slide, I do want to also point out, this was passed in the year 2022, and it pertains specifically to districts with over 200 students and to charter schools and to state tribal compact schools with 200 or more students. So if we have folks that are here or watching later from our tribal compact schools or from our charter schools, just so that you know, that's how the numbers pertain to you. Although certainly I also really believe that a lot of what we're talking about here tonight is just in the best interest of your students and of your school. But in terms of legal requirements, the number 200 seems to be the magic cutoff. Okay.
You know, one other quick thing with the consulting the district art teachers.
Yeah.
It is really important at the secondary level, especially because the way we do our registrations is really detrimental to establishing a program. Basically, the way we do everything, and if you do it differently in your school or district, please let me know, because I'd love to move there. But usually we have registration and we have a whole bunch of stuff in our catalog, and kids sign up for stuff, and everything is determined by student sign up. And so if you're trying to establish a program and a pathway that makes sense, a scope and sequence of here's Art 1, and then there's 2D, and advanced, and then there's AP. Well, if there's not sign up for that, for one of those along the way, and there is sign up because somebody else decided to put, some other specialty thing in there because none of us are working together. Well, a bunch of kids for that. So, we got, fitness walking or whatever it is that we've got in competitive nose picking. And so we want, kids, we got to give kids what they want. So, you can't have that program.
How many kids sign up for that class? Sorry.
I know. So for us, we need to, work together to establish what is the basic, what is that basic core program and the progression, so that kids can have the best possible, starter, or if they want to go on to this in college or an art school or, a theater program or whatever. So if we have that, and then if there's stuff left over, then we have to fill those programs first, and it gives us more control as a recommending body to say this is what the program should be, scope and sequence K-12.
Yeah, that's so true. Yep, the scope and sequence, we can accomplish that a lot more effectively if we collaborate within our own districts and our own school buildings, for sure. Thank you. That's a great takeaway. In terms of accountability, we hear this question a lot. Here's what we know so far. State Board of Education is has recently, this very month in February of 2024, posted their report from the very first time that school districts were required to submit their record of compliance with this arts requirement. So it only became required in their annual reporting this year, and it was only published this month. So we're still digging in and trying to look through the data. I've actually sent in some questions to the State Board of Ed, just follow-up questions that I know people have already been asking me. So hopefully we'll have some more details to share with you in one of our upcoming trainings, our upcoming webinars that we've mentioned. But at least just so you know, the schools do have to submit every single year. There's a basic education compliance matrix that they submit, and they do literally have to write in whether they've met certain requirements in science and in since time immemorial, and in the arts, and in all these things. And prior to this year, the arts were not required on that. This is the first year that they have been required. So if you are curious to see what has been posted from that SBE report, I did just add it to our Arts Ed Washington website this week. But I also hope to have some more details for you with follow-up questions in some of our upcoming sessions. Okay. Funding model. First, let me say something happy. We received 122 survey responses from educators like you across the state when we sent out some initial questions. Thank you so much to everybody who participated. And I've had such wonderful conversations with leaders from different school districts, from different arts programs, different arts organizations, different community organizations, really helping to prepare coming webinars. And so thank you to everybody. Something I think is really worth noting on this map, contributed to us as a tool for future visual aids from the WAEA president, Becky Broyles. This map is a visual representation of where the 122 people responded from. Now, I realize we have a mountain range in the middle, but I would really, really, really love to start getting some more connections with folks in some of our less connected parts of the state. So especially if you are here tonight and you are looking at that going, oh, I live right there and I'm the only little map icon, or I didn't respond to this one and there's no one else in my region who did either. By all means, please follow up with us, because we are really wanting to make sure that we can actually understand what's going on in the different parts of the state in order to represent you. And we can't do that if we don't have connections in the different parts of the state. So with that in mind, of those 122 folks who responded, here is their self-reporting on how well they understood the education funding policies of Washington State. So you can see we have about 15.6% rating themselves at a 1, 29.5% rating themselves at a 2. That's already almost half. And then 32% at 3 out of 5. So an incredibly small margin. Roughly 23% of us would self-report at understanding a 4 or a 5. So we're certainly not going to fix all that tonight, but I do want to at least give you a really quick overview of why it is so complicated and hard to understand. The least of which is that things are always changing, and so that gives us a lot to catch up on. So first of all, we need to know when we have these conversations about funding of our schools, we want to keep in mind Washington is a local control state. I really do think that's a good thing, because as I've said in several different ways in this conversation tonight, our schools are all so different. Our geography is so different. Our student demographics, our teacher demographics, they're so different. So what works for one might not work for the other. And we want to trust the experts in each region to make the decisions that are best for them. That does create some opportunity for things to slip through the cracks, which is where some of these concerns come from. But overall, I at least really like to think that this is honestly a good thing. It is well-intentioned, and I think it gives us a lot of opportunity to collaborate with our principals, superintendent, school boards, local legislators, and figure out what's actually best for our students in our region. The second thing to keep in mind is budgeting versus funding. So every year, the state of Washington uses a sort of a percentage-based model, a model to estimate how much money they think each school district is going to need, based on things like the number of graduation requirements for math, based on things like counselors and nurses and administrators and just all sorts of things. Then they give the money to the school district. I'm super oversimplifying it, but I hope this at least is getting the point across well enough for the time we have. Give it to the school, who then gets to make those locally based decisions about how to implement the funds. Two things with this that can cause some issues. One, that model that the state uses does not fully fund every single dollar that the district ends up needing. If your district has a lot of really tenured teachers and their average is, say, $80,000 a year, but the state has funded you at $74,000 a year for each average teacher, basically you're going to have a deficit of what you're trying to pay out for your teachers of that $6,000 difference. And that gets really expensive when you're talking big districts, especially, right? And that's just one example. But then the other thing is there are pieces like these arts requirements. So the arts have been a required part of basic education for a long time. They were part of that funding model. But because they weren't being part of the accountability model of state reporting, in some of our schools, the money that could have gone to certain arts classes was able to be utilized for other things that were maybe at the time more immediate priorities. But over time, maybe possibly the administrators forgot that that wasn't meant as a long-term solution for those needs, and they forgot that they need to eventually get that money back to the arts. Just again, as an example. And so we have these struggles between what is funded from the state and what is actually paid as the school district budget. No easy fix. That's all I'm going to say. Otherwise, I'm going to get into too many rabbit holes. Okay. Then there's also a pretty massive equity issue, especially in Washington State. The way that we base our funding on property values, even when you look at things like state levies and bonds, if those are based on your state property values and you are living in a region with lower socioeconomics, your property values are lower. Those percentages that come to your school are going to be lower. Your kids are not going to get as much money as the neighboring district that has higher property values. So again, no easy fix, but it's important for us to understand that that plays into this conversation too. Also understanding there's a really complicated set of regulations. Some funding streams can be used for this. Some funding streams can be used for that. Some can be used for this or that. Some can only be for that. And so it gets a little bit overwhelming to keep track of if you're not having those conversations every day. A lot of this information is publicly available. I really don't think that our state or our school districts are trying to be maliciously private about this stuff. It's, I think, almost the opposite, that we have such a flood of information available to us in the internet these days that if we're too transparent with every single possible detail that you could possibly ever need to know, how do interested persons like yourselves even begin to find that information? Because there's so much to dig through. So to understand the regulations, and then number 5, to understand the complex set of priorities that your administrators are also choosing between, like James said earlier, they're trying to figure out how to fund their counselors, their security guards, their nurses, their building updates, their technology. There's a lot for our administrators to have to do. And it's a big, big puzzle piece trying to figure out how to make all the money work. But on top of this, another pro with its own little con on the side, you see over here in my little mountain on the right side of the screen, the upcoming ESSER cliff. So if your school hasn't already been feeling this, it's probably happening any day now. So as a result of 2020 and the horrible things that we experienced in the last few years, a lot of us received additional funding, and we're so grateful for that. But again, depending on how they were used, your district might be feeling more of a pinch now, either as some of those funds now disappear or as things are getting shuffled around to compensate for getting back to normal. So it's going to be so radically different in every single district. But that is a unique financial situation that adds to the complicated conversation we're having here. My big takeaway when visiting this topic, finances are, I think, for those of us that spend the majority of our life in the world of education, I think they can also be a little extra intimidating. There's the pressure of, we do this for the kids, we do this for the art form, we don't do it for the money. Talking about money feels selfish. We don't have the words. We don't always have the words that our business oriented friends, our entrepreneur oriented friends, our accountant friends, our legal friends, those people live in some of these conversations on a daily basis, and they might feel more comfortable than some of us do. But really, all we're trying to do is keep the arts in conversation. At least for me personally, I am not trying to say, how dare a principal add an extra counselor and cut an art class? Personally, I wouldn't say that. My heart goes out to them that have to make that decision. How do we choose between our kids that need a counselor and our kids that need art classes? How do we choose that, right? But I want to keep the arts in conversation. I don't ever want to think that those conversations, those hard decisions are being made without them remembering how important the arts are. That when we talk about how are we supporting SEL in our schools, oh, hey, the arts can do that. When we talk about balancing FTE, oh, hey, the arts might be able to help with that. When we talk about how to utilize our building space, oh, hey, the arts might be able to have an opinion, or the arts might need something in that conversation. So keeping the arts in the conversation, I think, is a really easy way to approach this topic of money without feeling like we have to know all the answers. We're just trying to keep arts in the conversation.
I think it's really important to note too that oftentimes that kind of mindset that we have about, you know, talking about the money feels selfish or whatever, it can be used against us. And, you know, we need to make sure that we are not taking on the administrator's responsibilities.
Ooh.
And I've
Okay,
heard,
yeah.
while I was talking to people, and they said, you know, well, you know, the budget is like a big pie, and, you know, if you want your little arts class there, you know, what are you going to take money away from? You know, what other programs are you going to take away from to have your arts program? And that is not our responsibility. The law,
I feel for them. That's a hard choice, but that's not our, that's not your personal burden to bear.
And, you know, I am happy to work with you on something that's equitable, and work with a group of other professionals, but I'm not going to have that put on me.
Yep. That's a great way to establish that boundary. Thank you. All right, so then what can we do next? And I figured we'd need a little bit of a pick-me-up, so let's take courage about these 5 really positive things. 1, because we're a local control state, you have incredible power to impact arts education in your community. You can talk to people, you can vote. Both of those carry a lot of weight in the way that things, the way that decisions are made in your community. 2, local school board members and PTA groups especially really care about your students, and you can help them understand why equitable arts education matters. Keep the arts in conversation for those people that also really, really care about your kids. 3, advocacy materials and trainings are available from a lot of different sources. And if you are feeling overwhelmed because there are so many different sources to get your advocacy materials from, I personally would invite you to check out our website, because we are constantly curating more and more, collecting and putting them all in some consolidated spaces for you so that you don't have to do your own Google search. We're doing the Google searches and we're pulling the materials that we think would be most beneficial and connecting you with other organizations, so that you can just go straight down our list of links and see what of their resources seem useful to you. Number 4, positive working relationships and celebrations of small successes are honestly beneficial in advocacy efforts. It's really easy to focus on all the things that need to change, but I really think sometimes if our administrators have the opportunity to celebrate something that's been really great in our program, that's a good way to stick a little bug in their ear so that when they are making these decisions, they remember, oh yeah, I remember that was a really powerful performance. And the one kid shared their testimony about how, you know, their band class made them decide not to drop out. And now that kid is whatever, first chair. They don't even have to be first chair. That's not all it's cracked up to be. It's not the only measure of success, right? But celebrating small successes can really go a long way in your advocacy efforts. And the 5th piece on this slide is you don't have to figure this out alone. There are a bunch of other awesome people here tonight, people that couldn't be here tonight, and people that we're working with in Arts Ed Washington that I know would love to connect with you as well. So there is a pretty graphic for some action steps. I'm going to zip through it because we're really close to the end. But basically, good for you. You already did number 1. Today's webinar got you the basic facts. Number 2, we have other webinars coming up, so taking that deeper dive. Number 3, at any point, sharing these stats, sharing your stories, those make a difference. Number 4, create those connections like we were just talking about. And number 5, repeat any of these steps as needed, even if it means going all the way back to the beginning and trying to understand that funding model in a little bit more detail. Okay, a main place that I want to also encourage you to stay informed is the OSPI website for the arts. So on their website, they include the learning standards, the assessments, graduation requirements, annual art show is coming up. a monthly newsletter that you can sign up for. By showing them that that website gets, or that web page gets traffic, that's something good for them to see. Also, when you are paying attention to things like elections for local school board members, there's an election for superintendent coming up this year, for governor. Paying attention to any of those gives you the chance to either say, I don't like how something's being done, I want to vote for someone new, or to say, I really value how this person is doing this to benefit the arts, I want to vote and make sure they stay there. But if you don't pay attention and vote, then you won't be contributing to that positive impact in your community or your state. So I do want to give you a moment to go ahead and share with us any remaining topics or questions. We won't have time to do them tonight, but we will hold on to them for future reference, possibly even share some little tidbits related to them on our social media pages. I'm going to give you about 1 minute to answer whatever you would like to type in. What related questions or topics would you like addressed in future sessions? And if you're not going to type anything, then I will, or if you're already done, then I will just point your attention to, at the bottom of this slide, James has generously given you his personal email address. I am also giving you our office address at Arts Ed Washington. And then just a reminder that at Arts Ed Washington, we post quite a lot of information on our Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and there's a little QR code, so you can just scan it and it'll take you right to our website. Also, while that's going, I'm going to skip on to the next one because it's almost the exact same slide and we're almost out of time. In a moment, I'm going to move from this poll into another one, and I'm going to ask, what is your final takeaway from tonight? And again, I'm probably just tainting my own data all over the place. Sorry about that, but I will go ahead and give you mine. My big takeaway: keep the arts in conversation. Keep arts education in the conversation. When you're talking about candidates, when you're talking about budgets, when you're talking about SEL, when you're talking about, you know, renovations for your building, when you're talking about FTE, ask yourself and then share with others, how do the arts factor into this conversation? And in some cases, the arts can benefit those conversations. So then we really want to keep them in those conversations. So that's my takeaway. I'll give you another second to finish up on this poll, and then I'll immediately launch that next one, asking for your takeaway, your final takeaways before we wrap up. James, any final thoughts from you as I switch over to the next poll?
Just, you know, please don't hesitate to contact me anytime if you've got, you know, more questions, and if I don't know the answer, I'm not afraid to say I don't know the answer, but I will, you know, try and find out, and we'll find out together. And at the very least, it'll be together, so you won't be alone on things. So I mean, I think that's the biggest takeaway for me of this entire experience, is partnering with Arts Ed Washington and bringing, you know, starting to bring all of the arts education associations together and having this kind of hub for the arts and in Washington State, you know, because we've all just kind of felt a little bit isolated at times. So that's the biggest thing for us, you know, to not necessarily use OSBI and different places that are politically beholden in any way. So it's all just good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. I know I, for one, have really, really enjoyed that sense of community that I'm seeing in a lot of our arts groups, whether it's big statewide organizations like the WAEA, or whether it's just little districts and getting to talk with some of the district arts teams. It's been really neat. I definitely get this sense that there are a lot of people in Washington State that are ready and eager to connect with others in education and others in the arts. And I'm so honored to be a part of that with our organization, and just constantly learning from the rest of you. It's really pretty exciting. And I do also think it's worth noting that we divide and conquer a lot, right? somebody's an expert on this, somebody else is an expert on that. I'm not an expert, but I have time to go look it up, and then I can share with others. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be gained by our sense of community and collaboration these days. All right, so people are finishing up this last poll. The biggest takeaway from the session, people are typing away on that. People are also rating their overall increase of understanding of the main topics we talked about. I see the numbers building in the chat. I haven't clicked over to look at that yet, but I will very soon. Thank you so much for being here. This will be up on our website in the next day or so. You'll also notice I've snuck in one last slide for you. When you download it, you'll have access to all of these links that I think would be really helpful for you to stay engaged and informed moving forward. But don't worry about being distracted with that yet. You'll get it when you download the presentation. That is everything for tonight. James and I will take a look at the chat here before we log off, but otherwise, thank you so much, folks.
Dearest Miranda, how do I